Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. Break it down with the proper perspective.
What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing out there? Let me stop the screen share and fix my screen. What's going on? It's Saturday night. I think I got the day right. It's Saturday. It's March 8th, whatever day it is of the week. Sometimes these days start rolling into each other. But how y'all doing out there tonight? This is Shabazz with the proper perspective. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. Like I do. I get these little messages where YouTube is saying we're sending off notifications, and the same with Facebook, TikTok, and so on. So while the notifications are going out, I'm just gonna take my time. I'm gonna play one of these songs. Y'all tell me.
That white people can do is to stop denying black people their freedom. The only act that white people can do is to stop denying black people their freedom.
Well, if free black America is the #1 tactic, then all this geriatric theatrics is bombastic. Political gymnastics, the act slick bastards with fork-tongue fuckery, and all we get is jack shit while bending over backwards. So loyal to their hat tricks that all we ever prove is how.
What's going on, everybody?
Crazy they done drove us.
What's poppin'?
Jesus and Joseph's. The
Shabazz with the proper
only hand
perspective.
out jokers and slick-witted cobras that slither around in silence and set us up like Oprah for us to argue over.
I'm gonna get it started in a minute. If you just tuning in, everything is waiting for the notifications to go out.
Did we take it upon ourselves and go for broke for? If it ain't for reparations, then what's to vote for? If it ain't for reparations, ain't no point to vote, bruh.
We must understand white supremacy. What this country does, it enslaves black people. We must understand white supremacy.
Can y'all hear that music?
What this country does, it enslaves black people. The only act that white people can do is to stop.
Okay, so the music is over. What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? This is Shabazz with the proper perspective. I'm giving it a couple of minutes to see who's gonna come through. What's up to D, who said what's up, proper? I'm hanging in there. I'm doing good. What's good, D? Thanks to anybody tuning in on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and YouTube. Now, y'all know my favorite place is YouTube. So I want to see y'all come on over to the YouTube spot. But what's going on, everybody? Shout out to Lasky Linda. I hope I said your name right. I'm not sure if I did. I ain't got the best eyesight. Got these specs on. Gonna try to drop a little knowledge on you tonight. If you can see, if you're on TikTok, if you're on Instagram and Facebook, then you can't really see the title of tonight's discussion and conversation. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. So let me just go ahead and say it. What we're trying to talk about tonight is unveiling the truth. What truth is that? Unveiling the truth about whether or not Africans discovered America before Columbus. But really what we're going to do is we really trying to work on, I'm just one man. I can't take on such a huge task all on my own. What I'm really trying to do is defend, yeah, that's right, I said defend Ivan Van Sertima. Now, Ivan Van Sertima is a particular scholar in the African world, in the pro-black world, in the Afrocentric streets. He is a giant in his own right. And I, for one, am sort of taking up the call to defend his research because someone recently sent me a post on Facebook. And now I'm not one for battling and debating and arguing. Well, I kind of am, but I'm not trying to do that. What I try to do is I try to step back into my role as a teacher, as a professor. I try to keep my cool and my calm and my collected side when I do these talks. But I've been known to, lose sight a little bit. But what we're gonna do tonight is try to defend Ivan Van Sertima, or at least defend some of his research. So someone has sent me a post on Facebook. Now I may mention the person's name. I'm not really trying to, but I mean, it may fall out my mouth once or twice tonight, especially since I got all my notes and I'm gonna be reading off my notes. But the person was basically saying Ivan Van Sertima is his book, They Came Before Columbus, is historical fiction. And I took offense to that. I took offense to that. So I decided, okay, let me see if I can find my old books. I used to have like this huge bookshelf behind me. I had two. I had a bookcase, and then I had these little funny little wall book shelves. So I had all these books all lined up. But that's neither here nor there. Shout out to anybody joining the live. Shout out to Jay. What's going on? Or Jay money sign. Peace to you. I see you up in here. Appreciate you. Let's see. Shout out to Mac. D says mention his name. Shout out to so that's Jay, that's Mac on TikTok. And anybody else, if you're coming on over to youtube.com/@theproperperspective, that's where I would really like for you to show up. I need you to hit the like, I need you to hit the bell for notifications. Let me see, where is my little messages that I'm supposed to put on the screen so people can see them? My captions. Here we go. Like, share, and subscribe. youtube.com/@theproperperspective. So like, share, and subscribe there. Come on over to the YouTube page and give me a like. That's how I really get my my stats rising on up. But so we're gonna start off, like I said, this is about Ivan Van Sertima. This is about Africans discovering the Americas before Columbus. But we're gonna start off. I'm gonna sprinkle a little West African wisdom on you before we really jump deep down into the what's that phrase when you into the rabbit hole, so to speak. So now this one you may have heard before. I usually try to stick to ones that haven't been heard too often, but tonight I think it's a little bit more fitting to use one that you might have heard before. So let me see. Now, hold on. Now, let me do one last little check. I gotta make sure the microphone is working. Okay, the microphone is working. Last time I didn't do my mic check, I was online for 45 minutes with no sound. But so this West African wisdom I'm talking about. Until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Now, I'm almost sure that you heard that one before. I don't know for sure. Like if you have absolutely no background and no contact with pro-black, Afrocentric, radical circles, then maybe you never heard it. But if you got any kind of connection, you probably have heard that one before. So let me shout out. Or now, if you're in the YouTube chat, drop a 1 in the chat if you have heard that before. But perhaps it's time we let the lions, our African ancestors, share their narratives. Perhaps it's time we defend the lions instead of trying to attack them. A lot of these scholars that I refer to, like my entire series during Black History Month was like a shout out and giving reverence to Black scholars who have significant contributions. And one of the things I have a problem with is, like, we're supposed to be standing on the shoulders of our giants, but I see way too many people trying to tear them down. And that's why I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this type of thing. So let me slow it down a little bit. Let me see. I got 15 new messages. TikTok be rocking and rolling. So shout out to Brow, Kinman, Waka Mice. I do apologize. I'm gonna mess up names left and right. Let me see. Hayden Kennington has joined. Let me see. Solo. Who's behind you? Solo leveling. Jay, who's behind you? I'm gonna assume that's a question I should try to answer. If you're talking about my mural back here, that's a comedic mural. I can't necessarily give the whole full breakdown on that, but this right here is Tehuti, if that's what you was asking. But let me go on back. I digress a lot. So let me just say this. Let me start off like a professional. Good evening, truth seekers and skeptics alike. Today we dive into the audacious world of historical revisionism, where challenging established narratives is either groundbreaking, if you're a palm-colored scholar, or it's downright drapetomaniacal, if you got the melanin content. In other words, if you're black. Now, spotlight shines on the late and great Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, whose controversial work, yes, it was controversial. It was controversial when he first published it. It was controversial when he revised it. And it has remained controversial for the entire time ever since. But we shine a light on the late, great Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, whose controversial work, They Came Before Columbus, dared to suggest that Africans, yeah, them people, Africans set foot in the Americas before a certain Cristobal, I can't read a map, Cologne. So tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to include in this discussion a few West African proverbs that will shed light on this topic. I'm gonna try my best to hit you with some real quotes and some links to the works. Now, again, when I get into the quotes, when I get into the links, as far as TikTok, Facebook, Instagram is concerned, you're not gonna be able to see them. Come on over to youtube.com/@the-proper-perspective, and it will be all up on the screen so you can see them. If I have time, I'm gonna go into Lerone Bennett's Before the Mayflower, because it briefly touches on the notion, doesn't go anywhere near as deep as Ivan Van Sertima. But let me just tell you, let me see if I can. I thought now I had the book. Let me see if I can find the book. I at least want to show you the book. They Came Before Columbus. Yeah, so let me see. How can I put this on the screen? They Came Before Columbus. So if I move this over here and widen it up just a little bit, I at least want to try to share it on the screen so you can see. I'll just put this up here for a hot second. They Came Before Columbus. So this is the text. This is the book that we are talking about tonight. The African Presence in Ancient America by Ivan Van Sertima. Just so you can see it on the screen, like I said. Now let me stop that share and come on back to the regular. And widen my screen. So as I said, there was a post on Facebook calling this outstanding scholar who has degrees from Rutgers University and all this other, like he did all of the work at even the Ivy League universities. So, to disrespect him like that is like, hold on. I mean, half of us don't want to even associate ourselves with HBCU. Half of us are like, you ain't really, really real. You ain't really scholastic if you didn't go to a PWI. Where this brother went to a PWI. This brother went to a PWI, got his PhD. Cultural anthropologist, linguist, and so on and so forth. So he first published this in 1976. And his work proposes that African mariners, salesmen, not salesmen selling, but boatsmen, sailors, reached the Americas long before Christmas. I can't read a map. Columbus stumbled upon the Caribbean thinking he was in India. Why am I saying all of this? Well, I touched on it briefly already. There are critics, quite a lot of them. Now, for a long time, most of his critics were white. Now, if that's not the appropriate term, Caucasian. If that's not the appropriate term, envelopians. A lot of time, for a long time, most of his critics were of the male mafia. But more recently, now during that time when most of his critics were envelopian, palm-colored people, he took them to task. Every time they challenged him, he came right back at them. So again, there were a lot of critics. Most of them were the palm-colored. There were some Mexican critics, and there were some blacks. But there are supporters also dueling it out over this theoretical framework, is what I call it, that Van Sertima proposed. Now, I can't stress this enough. When Ivan Van Sertima made this proposition, he was not saying, based on the research that I've done, this is an established and absolute fact, and there is absolutely no way that you can refute me. Now, had he said that, then you'd have room to say, wait a minute, back it up. He didn't say that. He said this is a theoretical framework based on the research, based on the information that I'm looking at. It's quite likely, it's quite probable, it's quite possible that there were some groups of West Africans who did get into boats, who did build boats, put them in the water, jump onto the ocean, and sail on over here. So again, now, while tonight's show is inspired by my own take, my proper perspective, it's going to be dedicated to delivering what I hope is a comprehensive refutation of the claims that many white, racist, Eurocentric lens scholars or Eurocentric lens supporting scholars have crafted. And unfortunately, too many of our own brethren are sucking up this information and adopting in their pursuits to look seemingly like they're more woke than the rest of us, to look seemingly like they're more woke than our ancestors. Shout out to Mexican Jesus. Shout out to Christian Rodri, who has joined the chat on TikTok. Let me run that back, make sure I said it properly. So, well, I'm going to be trying to I'm dedicated to delivering a comprehensive refutation of the claims that many white racist Eurocentric lens supporting scholars have crafted. And unfortunately, too many of our own brethren are adopting today in their pursuits of seemingly being more woke than our ancestors. When they downplay, when they dismiss, when they castigate black scholars like Ivan Van Sertima and his work, They Came Before Columbus, I get a little agitated. So let's talk about this for a second. Because it's okay, you know, in the realm, in the field of research, it would be nice if there was no bias. It would be nice if there was no racism or racial undertones. Shout out to, oh Lord, I can't see these names. Imbo Vanada on Instagram for joining in. But it's not just white scholars rehashing their tired old arguments against Van Sertima. It's some of our own so-called black scholars. Now, sometimes, like, you know, if you're a bona fide scholar, maybe I should give you a little bit more grace. Maybe. I don't know, though. Depending on what I mean by bona fide. But when our own black scholars lead the charge, trying to tear down these great giants, you know the type, the ones who the ones who didn't lift a single book to help build the foundation, but now they want to play demolition crew on the work of real intellectual giants. The ones who aren't spending their time furthering research, substantiating claims, or challenging Eurocentric academia from a Black centerist perspective. No, no, no. They wouldn't dare do that. That would require actual scholarship. Instead, they figured out that tearing down our own, parroting the same old white academic critiques that VanSertima himself defeated when he was alive, they figure that's a much quicker path to YouTube likes, TikTok gifts, and monetization paychecks on social media. So really, even though, yeah, I was like just momentarily, so to speak, most recently inspired to do this defense by the post on Facebook, I've been in quite a few online chats. I've been on quite a few YouTube channels. I've seen several videos. I've been in quite a few groups. And it seems like there's a zeitgeist, if I can use that term, where there's a whole lot of us trying to get our rocks off and sound like we woke and sound like we scholastic. And all we're doing is reading off refutations that are 40 years old, that are 50 years old. The same refutations that they threw at Ivan Van Sertima 40 years ago. You got these young brothers getting online saying, well, did you know? Did you read this? I didn't have to read it. Ivan Van Sertima refuted it in his own book. It's not my fault you just found a scholarly resource. These YouTube scholars, because let's keep it real, that's what they are. They act like they're dropping groundbreaking critiques, when really they're just regurgitating decades-old Eurocentric nonsense, dressed up as critical analysis. Shout out to RIP, or Rest in Peace. Shout out to Jack Moore. Shout out to Tosan Timmy. Anybody else? Let's see. Finn, shout out to Finn, who joined. So yeah, I got a problem. I got a serious problem. Their whole game is to act like they're the intellectual elite because they can dismiss a Black scholar, as if mimicking the skepticism of white academia makes them somehow more rational or objective. It's not as though they got on the airplane and they went to Mexico and looked at the Olmec heads. No, but VanSertima did. They scoff at VanSertima. Hey, they scoff at Cheikh. They scoff at any Black scholar who dared to challenge the Western historical narrative. And they do it with the same smug energy that the white gatekeepers who dismissed these men 30, 40, 50 years ago did. But here's the kicker. They don't even have new arguments. And that's part of my, that's really, really what gets to me. They don't have new arguments. Like I said, they just regurgitating what somebody said 30 years ago. They're still running with the same weak, half-baked refutations that VanSertima already bodied and buried decades ago. These folks claim they're raising the bar for Black scholarship, but all they're really doing is cosplaying as Eurocentric intellectuals while selling our ancestors' legacies down the river. They aren't standing on the shoulders of giants. They're busy trying to break those giants' legs. Now I'm going to get off my soapbox in a minute. So let me be clear. If you're more interested in discrediting Black scholars who paved the way in building upon their work, you're not a scholar. You're not scholastic. You might be an agent. You're not here to uplift truth. You're here to play for Team Uru. Team Uru? What you talk about? Team Urugu. Team Urugu? What you talk about? Y'all better read those books, because we see you. Now, because I try to pride myself on being fair, although it may not sound like it if you just tuned in, welcome to youtube.com/@theproperperspective. I know you might be watching me on TikTok, Facebook, or Instagram, but I'd rather you jump on over to youtube.com/@theproperperspective. I do try to pride myself on being fair. I give myself a little leeway and grace because I'm no longer teaching in the classroom. Were I in the classroom, I probably would not have read off all of, I would not have spilled off all of my introduction. But I ain't in the classroom no more. But I will say that those who critique VanSertima may have some grounds to be honored. And this is me trying to be balanced, fair and balanced, like Fox News. But most usually, I find there is a mix of valid critiques thrown together, unfortunately, with some heavy doses of emotional bias and Eurocentric gatekeeping, all suited and booted to look like intellectual rigor. I'm going to give you a real specific example, too. But let me stress this at the start. This is still my intro, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I'm going off. VanSertima's work has weaknesses. I'll be the first to tell you that. I'll be the first to say there were some weaknesses in his arguments. There were some weaknesses in his theoretical framework. He never said these were facts. He said, I am putting together information. That's what historians do. They look at the facts and they draw together conclusions, and then they present it in a story that makes sense. So, let me stress this. I said that. Okay. Now I'm going to break down point by point, and I hope that you with me as I dismantle. I'm not going to say his name. It almost came out. And again, to be honest, like I don't know the person. I don't know the person. I don't know if they're popular and famous or unpopular or unknown. I really don't. It was just a post. And it rattles me. So here we go. Now, the first claim that this person made, they made quite a few. But the first claim this person made, they said the book as a whole, and this is really what gets me. If you want to have an honest intellectual discussion about somebody's work, then you should not be trying to drag down their entire body. That's usually a red flag. But so this person said the whole text, They Came Before Columbus, is almost historical fiction. That's heavy. That's a heavy critique. You're basically saying this man is lying in the whole book. That's what you're saying. Now, what I say is to make this type of a claim, you're using in logical debate lingo what they call a straw man argument. You're using what they call over exaggeration. You're using what they call hyperbole, maybe in literary senses. VanSertima's book contains both strong and weak claims, like I said, but to call it almost historical fiction, now that's just dishonest. That's intellectually lazy. There's no way if you read that text, there's no way you could say from page 1 to the very end of the book is historical fiction. Nah, that's not working. Now, some of his stronger evidence, like the African linguistic and cultural impact on Mesoamerica, it does remain debated. There are Black scholars, white scholars, Mexican or Mesoamerican scholars that are still debating his work. So if they're still debating it, they wouldn't debate it if they thought it was absolute fiction. They wouldn't be debating it if they thought it was almost historical fiction. They would just say, we ain't dealing with that. But his theories are still being debated. Now, he has, even though I may not 100% feel as though this next claim is his weakest claim, I can understand why someone would say this next claim is one of his weakest claims, because he did have a claim in there about ancient Egypt, and he did look at some evidence and say that the 25th dynasty of ancient Egypt had some type of contact with the Americas. Yeah, I'm like, okay, so that's a weak claim. Or no, I'm not. It's not necessarily a weak claim, but his body of evidence that supports that claim, that was a little weak. So again, now this is me trying to be fair, firm, and consistent, fair and balanced, like Fox News. But this claim and the supports for this claim being weak, that doesn't invalidate the entire work. So I'll give you an analogy. If a historian incorrectly dates a battle in a book, big textbook, all kinds of dates, and he got one date wrong, but he provides strong evidence for all the other claims that he makes, you don't dismiss the entire book as fiction. You don't say it's almost fiction. That's anti-intellectualism. That's laziness. I would go so far to say it's sycophantic devotion to the white Eurocentric lens. When said historian is of the melanated section of the human family in particular, because they like to do this to Black scholars. They like to nitpick. They like to find, like, if you got 10 claims, and let's say all 9 of them are knocking it out the park, but the 10th one is weak, they will harp on the 10th one and say, because number 10 is wrong, because number 10 is weak, this whole thing is garbage. But they only do that to us. They don't do that with their own. The palm-colored scholars are allowed to have an overwhelming majority of weak arguments, and they'll still find a way to uplift that and say, this is some very credible information. It really requires further study. But they don't give Black scholars that. And I get it. In all walks of life, if you're Black, you're going to be up against that type of arrogant refusal to admit your greatness, to admit your effectiveness. This is what we've come to understand, especially in the belly of the beast, of the United Snakes of America. But when we start to do it, when other Black scholars, or I don't even want to call them scholars, but when other Black people start to do it to our own, like I said, I got a problem. Now, I may pull up this video. I think I'm going to pull up this video. So there's a good video. It's not a bad video. There's a good video, and that's why I want to pull it up. But the second claim, I just hit you off with the first claim. And the first claim, like I said, in that first claim, okay, so yes, there's some weakness in VanSertima's text. Now, the second claim, VanSertima had confirmation bias and preyed on Black people's need to feel important. Now, this is one that white folk throw at us a lot. Every time we find some new information about something that counters, that contradicts the narrative that they've been constructing, they say, we need something to feel proud about. Nah, I'm not buying it. That's deflection. You're deflecting with emotional appeals instead of engaging the facts. This argument, this strategy, weaponizes self-doubt. It weaponizes self-doubt against Black people by suggesting that any attempt to reclaim history is just wishful thinking. When you start to look at the historical record, what you begin to see is, most oftentimes, we're not the ones revising history. We're not the ones guilty of historical revisionism. We're not the ones revising it, rewriting it. We're the ones correcting it. And my classic example that I always use is the whole Columbus discovering America. That's a myth. That's a false narrative. Now, when our Black scholars started standing up and saying, That's not true. They accuse our Black scholars of being historical revisionists. No, we may be historical correctionists. If you put out a false narrative, we're not the revisionists looking for self-pride when we correct your lies. But that's what they do when they deal with VanSertima. They try to shift the blame away from the fact that they've lied. So again, the guy on Facebook completely ignores that European historians have spent centuries fabricating and over-exaggerating white achievements. You know, they tell you that Greece is the start of civilization. That's a lie. The start of civilization in that area of the world came from Kemet. But they say you're a revisionist when you bring this up. No, you're a correctionist. You are a correctionist, not a revisionist. Like I said, the Columbus discovering America. You're not a revisionist when you correct that. When Black scholars attempt historical reconstruction, because that's what it is, you're reconstructing the truth. That's when they want to say confirmation bias. It wasn't confirmation bias when you said Columbus discovered America. That's the confirmation bias. Pointing out the lie does not make you in need of self-pride. I'll give you another analogy. Europeans like to glorify Vikings, at least some Europeans. I ain't gonna say all, but there is a nice little pocket of Europeans that like to glorify the Viking heritage. And they love the fact that the Vikings were explorers and travelers and sailors on the seas. They love the fact that there's a mythical King Arthur in the England area, the Anglo-Saxon culture. They don't get accused of clinging to fantasy. But when Black people start exploring legitimate historical connections, it's wishful thinking. If that ain't the be all of hypocrisy, historical hypocrisy, scholastic hypocrisy. So yeah, there's all kinds of white scholars that fabricate and exaggerate European achievements. Yet when Black scholars attempt to correct the falsehoods, now all of a sudden it's a bias. Now, when you deal with VanSertima's work, his text, he actually used resources, the sources that were available to him. What do I mean by that? Christopher Columbus is said to have written in his own diaries. And they don't have the diaries anymore, but they have people who supposedly wrote down or copied what was in the diaries. Well, VanSertima took a look at those. And according to those, Columbus himself documented reports of Black traders in the Americas before the transatlantic slave trade. So period, point blank, end of story. The man y'all want to say was the first over here, and we know that's a lie, but y'all cling to the lie. Y'all say he was the first over here. He says, I saw Black people. But you got Black folks saying VanSertima is writing fiction. How is he writing fiction when he's telling you he's writing, this is what was in Columbus's book, this is what was in such and such's book? That's not fiction. That's a news reporter, basically. When you turn on the 6 o'clock news and they say, well, there was a shooting on 5th Street, you don't say, well, he's just making it up. So that's my second point. That's my second, refutation of the Facebook scholar, the anti-Black scholar, They like to deal with this stuff. They also like to say, my third one, too many black folks in America for the all of us were royalty storyline. Hey, I might even agree with you. I will say that's a straw man argument. That's deflection again. Why? First and foremost, Ivan Van Sertima didn't make the argument. You can't attack a man's research for a claim he didn't make. So who is it that said all black people were royalty? It wasn't Van Sertima. That's not his argument. That's not his research. That's not his textbook. Now, the point isn't about who was royal and who was not. It's about who had the ability to travel, who had the ability to trade, to conduct trade, who had the ability to influence other regions. Ivan Van Sertima does not make the claim that everybody who came over here was royal. So are you trying to critique him, or are you trying to distract and throw off everybody? I think it's the former. Now, it is a fact, historical record, that African societies had merchant classes, they had explorers, they had scholars, they had royals, they had peasants, they had scribes, they had soldiers and warriors. It's not like every society on the continent was just a society of slaves. No. Or a society of enslaved laborers or indentured servants. They had the whole full-scale gamut. So if you have a society and it's filled with merchants, scholars, warriors, sailors, businessmen, and traders, now you're opening up the level playing field to say, well, okay, it's feasible. And even saying it's feasible doesn't say it's factual. You're just saying it's feasible. If you have a society that has absolutely no civilization, no hierarchy, no classes, no structures, okay, then you can say, well, wait a minute, what you talking about? What you smoking? But that ain't what we're talking about. We ain't talking about those kinds of societies. Again, to make that claim means you're trying to deflect and you're trying to impress, you're trying to infer that there are no organized societies in Africa at that time. So now we come upon some of the examples. Now, if you already know this stuff, then okay, great. But you know, Mansa, y'all know what Mansa means? King, emperor. Mansa Abu Bakr II of Mali. There are reports that he sent 200 ships into the Atlantic in the 14th century. The 14th century. That's well before Cristobal Colon thought he had found India. There's historical documented evidence of the Moors who got on ships and ended up taking over parts of Europe. Matter of fact, they say they influenced European civilization to the point as to teach them how to take baths. So if you got these kinds of civilizations, you got these kinds of well hierarchical structured societies, you can have some seafarers. That's not historical fiction. Carthage is another African civilization that was literally a maritime power in its day. No serious scholar, no serious student of Black history, of Black civilizations, of Black studies would promote the notion of Black history being just about the royals. We was all kings. That's a horrible meme that's out there. Now, there is an argument to be made about African agency, and it should be made. It should be made on and off the continent in all annals of academic-oriented fields, including world history. We weren't all kings, but we weren't all slaves either. Now, trying to figure out what's the best spot for me to play this video. Let me see if I can pull it up. I'm gonna pull it up. I'm almost sure y'all can't hear that, since I'm not sharing the screen. You shouldn't really be able to hear it. Let me see. Anybody else joined in? Appreciate that, D, for saying I got a good perspective on it, keeping it real. Yes, I'm doing my best. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Richie Sofo has joined. Let me see. Anybody else? Anybody else? Richie Sofo. Okay. Let me see. So again, now let me get this next little refutation ready. Because again, this brother on Facebook said, well, VanSertima changed his timeline in Early America Revisited because he had no evidence. Now, first, you make your original claim. I'm telling you, this how we gonna do it like it's school. This how we gonna do it like it's class. Because I was a teacher. You make your original claim. That's your thesis. Now it's time to support your thesis. Your thesis said that they came before Columbus was almost historical fiction. Okay, I'm gonna let you build your argument. And then when it's time to give me your supports, one of the reasons I'm so dead set against they came before Columbus is because in another book, wait, hold up. Wait a minute. What? In another book? So now you got beef with another book. Okay, you allowed to have beef with another book, but not while you analyzing book number one. So to get up here and say you don't like what he did in Early America Revisited, that has no place in the discussion about they came before Columbus. That's one. Now you do that in a paper in a classroom, in my classroom, you walking down the halls of an F. I don't take irrelevant information too kindly. But that's just one. More importantly, so let's just say, okay, that's just my own personal shtick. And another teacher would allow it. Or I say, okay, I'm gonna let it slide and let you keep rolling. Here's what's even more important. The idea that VanSertima changes his timeline. Now you say he did it because he had no evidence. I'm saying this is a misrepresentation of scholarly revision. Scholars are always revising things. You have the setup for a timeline based on the information you have. When you get in new information, you adjust things. There was a time when they thought the world was flat. And when they discovered new information, they realized it's not flat. Now, if they simply sit there and remain obstinate in their ideology that the world is still flat, that's not scholarly. Now, I know that's probably a dangerous analogy because I know we today have a plethora of online pseudo scholars who are trying to promote the idea that, yes, indeed, the earth is actually flat and you've been lied to. Other than the wring your neck, I'm not dealing with those kind of people. But you get my point in the analogy. VanSertima, refining his argument in Early America Revisited, is not proof of deception. It's called academic growth. Why? Because scholars revise theories all the time based on new evidence. And again, let me say, VanSertima's work was not promulgated as fact. It was promulgated as theory, as theoretical framework based on the evidence. So when you make adjustments to your timeline, it doesn't mean that your entire premise is false. There was at one point, based on biblical scholarship, they thought the whole world was 6,000 years old until they discovered new scientific information and was like, oh, so that biblical stuff ain't necessarily 100%. Scholars are always revising their work. His revised timeline aligned with the new findings of his time on the Olmec civilization. It's called intellectual honesty, my people. It's not a fraud. You just have to get that straight in your head. But let's pause and ponder for a minute, because I got a question for you. When have historians not revised timelines? You got whole societies and civilizations that have entirely different calendars. So their timelines don't even match unless you do adjustments. There's never been a time when historians didn't revise their timelines. In this regard, history is like a Wikipedia page, constantly being edited, occasionally being vandalized. Now, I'll give you an example. There's this thing in American history. It's called the Lost Cause narrative. It reimagines the American Civil War, and it paints the Confederacy in a sympathetic light. This revisionist history dominated U.S. textbooks for decades. I would dare say there's still remnants of it in today's textbooks. It showcased, and this example showcases how interpretations can be manipulated to serve particular agendas. Ultimately, this type of thing can cut both ways. Now, I know y'all heard of Einstein. Would it puzzle you to know that Einstein made adjustments to his theory of relativity? Nobody says he's committing intellectual fraud, historical fiction, or scientific fiction. There was Anatoly Fomenko's new chronology theory. And this gem proposes that events attributed to ancient civilizations actually occurred during the Middle Ages. How about that for a plot twist? But they don't discredit him as a scholar. They only do the discredit game when it comes to a black scholar. That's my point. Dr. Yosef Ben Yochanan, had an adjusted timeline for ancient Egyptian history, and everybody got blown out of shape. How dare you? How could you? And he shot back at him. And when he got finished asking them a series of questions, they were like, oh, we didn't know you knew that part. So yes, Einstein revised parts of his theory of relativity. I don't hear anybody calling that fiction, because that's how scholarship works. You have to update your information based on new studies. Now, again, VanSertima's work was published in 1976. Back then, it was groundbreaking back then it was historically accurate to the time. So somebody in 2025 saying it was historical fiction, you don't understand what you're reading. Ha ha. Y'all says what? Post on Facebook. I was gonna try to I gotta try to find it. But see, even if I find it, let me see if I can look it up real quick. Let me see. Where is it? I had it pulled up, but I had effectively said I wasn't gonna show it. I'm not really trying to I try to avoid the YouTube beef type thing, especially me being a new channel and whatnot. But if I find it, I may pull it up, I may show it. Let me see if I can. It's not, well, I'm gonna keep looking for it. No, it's not there. I know where I can find it. Okay, so that's the section. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just trying to find this. That's the second request to put the post on blast. Nope, that's the wrong one. I got a lot in here. So if I find it later, I'll post it. I'll add it to the channel or whatever. I'm not gonna be able to find it just right now. But I am literally taking that person's the claims. When I say this is the claim, that is literally what came out of their post. So again, now critics argue that VanSertima's claims lack concrete evidence. And they veer and they say that his arguments veer into the realm of historical fiction. And one of the things that they want to point out is they'll say the absence of African DNA in Olmec remains and the lack of corroborating artifacts. Now, sounds like a good point. Sounds intimidating. Sounds like you really did your research. Here's what I'll say. I think I'm gonna pull up a couple of proofs. However, dismissing his theories outright may overlook the complexities of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact. While definitive proof remains elusive, like I said, trying to be fair, firm, balanced, like Fox News, I can admit when there's a problematic area of research or argumentation. So while definitive proof remains elusive, the notion isn't entirely far-fetched. Dismissing his theories in this way really just barks up the tree of self-hate. Because really what you're doing is, well, the white man don't agree with you. That's what you're saying. Because you have no problems believing that white people jumped in the water and sailed the 7 seas whatsoever. You ain't got no problem with that. But you feel as though it's impossible for black and or brown civilizations to do this. Why? Because ain't nobody white told you that they could. So going further, and I got some more stuff on this. So yeah, I'm going to get into this. So going further, they claim, this is the next claim, the Olmec remains don't have any African DNA. How could those people have possibly gotten into boats and came on over here if there's no African DNA? Again, you sound like you done really did something. Why? Because most people are scared of the conversation about DNA. That's the only reason you sound like you onto something. Most people are too afraid of the DNA conversation. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to come across like I'm a DNA expert. I am not. I am not by any means a DNA expert. But we're going to get into this. We're going to address the elephant. We're going to address the Olmec head in the room. These critics that argue that there's no African DNA in Olmec remains Number one, here's my first point for you. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Did you catch that? The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. After all, they've been wrong before. Like I said, remember when they thought the earth was flat? Yeah, we know. A lot of y'all still do. This is where I'm going to use that other video. I got a video I'm going to pull up for you. So again, if you're on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, if you really want to see this next little part, come on over to youtube.com/@theproperperspective. Now, this next section, this video section that I'm going to be showing, there is a conversation. Let me put this in the right place. Let me put this in the right place, or try to put this in the right place. There is a conversation that's going on. It's discussing the problem with DNA. Now, I got to be very careful because I got a strike the last time I played a video. So I got to break this thing up. So I'll be hitting pause a lot and trying to talk to you a little bit. But there's a conversation where there's a discussion about the problem with DNA evidence. So let me pull this on up. And I'm really going to get to, okay, so let me get to pull this on up and get this right. Come on over to youtube.com/@theproperperspective so that you can, because I don't even think you'll be able to hear this. But here we go. Let me see. Share my screen and turn on the sound. And here we go. And turn on the sound. Make sure I do this correctly. Boom. So here we go. Turn on the sound. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. It's coming, it's coming. I promise it's coming. Bear with me. Aye. And now it's gone again. Here we go. Back. Share the screen. And it disappeared again.
Origin. He concluded.
It's coming, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, there is a conversation about DNA. Pull it on over here the right way. Blow it up. And here we go. Turn up the microphone.
Concluded that 14% of the Olmec skeletons found and examined were African. The Olmec DNA analysis, there's a Dr. Maria Moreno and Miguel Galena. They did a pioneering study of the Olmecs, and they conducted research specifically. They analyzed mitochondrial DNA.
Number pause right there. That's a very good spot for me to pause on. So now, like I said, they're having this conversation, and this is specifically in reference to people saying there is no African DNA found in the Olmec remains. So there was an Olmec DNA analysis, and I'm gonna bug you out a little bit. So Dr. Maria Moreno and Miguel Galeana conducted this pioneering study of the Olmecs in Mexico. Specifically, Dr. Maria de Lourdes Munoz, Moreno, and Miguel Moreno Galeana, who analyzed mitochondrial DNA from purported 2 Olmec remains. Now that's a little funny to me. Only 2 Olmec remains, but I ain't the scholar on this topic. Found at the San Lorenzo and Loma del Zapote sites, identifying a distinctive A category haplogroup lineage in both individuals connected to indigenous Native Americans. mtDNA only identifies the maternal lineage. That's the point. Only identifies maternal lineage. Now, what did they say? Dissecting this pre-Columbian genomic ancestry of Native Americans, overall, our newly generated data revealed very limited non-Native American admixture, with only 1 Wichi or Waichi and 2 Yanisha samples showing appreciable levels of African ancestry. Now, this is kind of funny. As hard as they are going at trying to discredit the idea that there's any possible notion of an African presence, they still admit they found something. And they're trying to suppress it. They're trying to downplay it and say it's really not significant. But they still end up admitting they found something. So that's just interesting and curious to me. But more importantly, this is the study that people use when they say there's no African DNA over there. It's impossible. Now, like I said, I'm not a DNA scholar. But if you call up a DNA testing company, either because you're trying to prove or disprove your who the baby is, or you're trying to find out where your heritage extends, y'all do know it's 2 types of DNA, right? It's one that tests the maternal line, and it's one that tests the paternal line. They gotta test both sides in order to be clear, sure, definitive, complete, objective. They gotta test both sides. This study and others like it are only testing the maternal side. Y'all know what that means? That means they're only looking at a portion of, dare I say, half. Now, I know a little bit about DNA, not a lot, I'm not an expert, but let me put this out there in case anybody wanted to get on and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, because that's not how DNA works. I know it don't work that way, but I'm just saying, in the scheme of understanding things, you sort of get a little bit of DNA from your mother's side. You get a little bit of DNA from your father's side. That's that maternal line, paternal line. Well, if you're only testing one side of the body, how you know what came from the other side? There's no way you can be definitive in your conclusion, in your analysis. So to use a study like this and say, well, based on this study, we don't really find anything that would suggest an African presence. You looked at half of the information. You looked at half of the information. You only looked at two bodies, and only looked at half of the DNA information on those 2 bodies. And even in that, you still said, well, there was something, but it just wasn't high levels. Well, where do you think it come from? Okay, that's just me. I'm gonna slow that down. Now let me come back. Let me get off of the shared screen if I can. Let me pull up this just for a second. Let me stop the share. Come back to the regular. So again, these people that want to talk about the DNA analysis, maybe they don't realize that the study that they're using is ineffective, is incomplete. And so they want to use this DNA study to say it's impossible for there to be an African presence. The DNA study says, hey, look, we ain't got all the evidence ourselves. And that's just one, that's just a second point. Now, let me go back to this whole DNA thing, because there's another section, what I call misuse of genetic evidence. But let me see if I can pull this next little section up, because they told me in order to avoid the strike, I can't play no more than a minute. So I'm trying to keep it way up underneath the minute. So let me pull this thing on up a little bit more. I did my little editorial. They can't say that I'm using it nonstop. So now let me see. Let me try it this way. Share screen. Turn it on. Here we go. Now we got a little something here. Oh, no. There we go. Now. So I'm going to play this next little section for you.
Research is that they focus exclusively on mDNA or mitochondrial DNA, when in fact, mitochondrial DNA only tracks the mother's line of descendancy through the mother. So the male influence is completely excluded. And what we have is if we have seafaring Africans, they're more likely males that have come to the Americas and interacted with the indigenous Native Americans and produced offspring. And so in the absence of having Y DNA for this study, the study's actually irrelevant. It's not evidence to say that the Olmecs were not or did not have any type of African connection.
There we go. Now let me get this. Let me pull that on down and get it off the screen before somebody try to report me and strike my channel again. So again, what he said was the fact that this study only has the matrilineal line, it's actually irrelevant. It's actually irrelevant. You cannot reach a full conclusion. You cannot reach an accurate conclusion if you want to be a scholar when you only have a portion of the information. So again, all the YouTube scholars, all the Facebook scholars that enjoy trying to tear down the giants who did all the legwork, I don't see them getting on planes to go and do digs, but they think they know more than the people that got on planes and go visited dig sites and archaeological sites. But let me try to give you another analogy to make this really stick. Because like I said, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Now, if you're not sure what this means, I don't even blame you. First time I heard this phrase, I'm sitting up in the classroom like, man, what? But let me give you this little example. Imagine a murder trial where the prosecution claims that the suspect is guilty. However, the murder weapon was never found. No evidence of fingerprints at the crime scene. Whoever the suspect was cleaned up after himself. And so now the defense lawyer stands up and says, since there's no weapon, since there's no fingerprints, my client must be innocent. Now, is this true? Is it true that the client must be innocent? In actuality, not in the court of law, not the technicalities. Does that suspect have to be innocent because they didn't find the murder weapon? Does that suspect have to be innocent? Or were they just clever enough to clean up? Just because the weapon is missing doesn't mean that the crime didn't happen. There could be other evidence. There could be a witness. There could be a strong motive. There could be some circumstantial proof. We got you on camera walking in there. That supports the claim. We got that person on camera alive when you walked in. We got you on camera walking out. And we got a body. The lack of one type of evidence, the absence of evidence, does not prove that something didn't happen. It only means we haven't found all the right evidence, all the good stuff. So the key takeaway to this whole thing, if we haven't found genetic proof of African travel to the Americas, that doesn't mean it never happened. Again, they're only looking at the matrilineal. Let me say it this way, because this is what he said in the video. Well, who do you think? Like, they can show and prove that West Africans had boat building technology. There's a story documented that 200 ships were put into the water and they were manned by humans from West Africa. Which humans do you think came over? Do you think the boats were filled with women? Now, I'm not trying to sound, anti-feminist. I'm not trying to sound misogynistic. I ain't on that tip. But especially back in that day, the world was known to be masculine dominated, male dominated. So the majority of societies were dominated by men. Most of the warriors were men, most of the sailors were men, and so on and so forth. So if they had 200 ships and they manned them with humans from the society, they were most likely men. So when and if those men came over, if they got with some people, that's why you need to test the patrilineal line. Because that's the only way you would show. That's the only way you would, if you really want to disprove the idea that Africans could not have come over here, you would have to test the patrilineal line. So why didn't they? Why didn't they then? Why haven't they since? Why are people still trying to quote the matrilineal DNA test study, knowing it's not proof at all? There's a reason for that. So to be perfectly frank, DNA evidence for African contact in Mesoamerica is not conclusive. It's not conclusive either way. Why? Because they ain't test the side they were supposed to test. And that's on top of the fact that human remains decompose over time. Shout out to the Deontay L Show for joining the chat on youtube.com/@theproperperspective. Throw that on the screen for a hot second. Salute to you as well, my brother. Appreciate you joining. If I do find that, shout out to y'all. If I do find that that post, I will show it or post it or something like that. Let me see. So what was I saying? So again, now human remains decompose. Now maybe that's why they only tested 2. But they decompose, and they especially decompose in tropical climates over time. So the lack of African DNA in Olmec remains does not disprove African presence. It simply means we don't have the complete picture yet. So again, if you don't have the complete picture, how dare you say he was writing historical fiction? You were doing the job of the enemy, my brother. You're supposed to be standing on the shoulders of our giants. We're supposed to be about the business of either promoting their research or furthering their research, not trying to tear it down. Now, also in that video, I'm not, like I said, I can't play it all because I ain't trying to get any more strikes. But later on, he explains. I think I may have already said that the DNA studies critics rely on focus only on maternal lineage. So fact, mtDNA does only trace maternal ancestry. If African travelers like those Malian sailors, were mostly male, their genetic contribution would not appear in the mtDNA studies. It just wouldn't be there. And that would be true of any population. If you're looking for the male lineage in a population, you got to test for the male lineage in the population. What these critics do wrong, they pretend that the absence of African DNA disproves VanSertima, when in reality, they never tested for the male African lineage in the first place. So is it intellectual laziness or is it willful deception? Now, if I want to be fair and firm, I would just say it's intellectual dishonesty. How can you claim Africans weren't here when you didn't even check the male DNA? That's like checking a crime scene for footprints, but then refusing to look for fingerprints. And then coming off the crime scene saying, nobody was here. And I'll give you one to even look. Here's another one you can look up. I ain't even gonna go that far into it, but the Lucia woman, a 13,000-year-old skeleton, had African cranial features that they found in Brazil, clearly predating Columbus. Now, this don't mean that the pretendians can jump up and down and say, see, I told you we the real Americans. No, that ain't what it mean at all. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. It simply means that there's more suggestive information, more circumstantial evidence of an African presence, because they still have definitive DNA of a non-African presence. I almost slipped up and said that brother's name. But let me ask you this. Or let's go back to Ivan Van Sertima's work. Because in his text, he also delves into, he dives down the rabbit hole of clear cultural, linguistic, and artistic influence that does suggest interaction, ladies and gentlemen, interaction. So even if they have some miraculous way to explain away genetic contribution, genetic mixing, and they don't. But even if they did, they cannot explain away the cultural connections, the linguistic connections, the artistic connections. And they are just that, connections. So let me ask people like, I'm not going to say their name. Would you dismiss Viking presence in America just because Norse DNA isn't widespread amongst Native Americans? There's a whole field of study that says the Vikings came over here, but they ain't found no Viking DNA in Eskimos. They ain't found no Viking DNA in Cherokee. So does that mean the Vikings didn't come over here? So if you're not going to make that type of a claim, why are you going to try and apply that standard to the African presence? Just think about that. Like I said, the lack of evidence is often due to the lack of research. The lack of evidence is often due to the lack of research. Now, what do I mean by that? It's not necessarily because the evidence doesn't exist. The reason, I think I said that wrong. The reason, for example, there's so much information about ancient Egypt. So I'm jumping over. Now, I'm not jumping over to try to prove VanSertima was right about his thesis, his theory on ancient Egypt. But I'm just saying, the reason there's so much information about ancient Egypt is because there's always somebody doing research. Now, the Deontay L show, good question. Were the Vikings integrating and procreating when they came over here? I mean, that's a good question. That's a good question. To some extent, and I would even apply that question to the notion of the African presence. Because at least for Ivan Van Sertima, with some of the research that he showed, that he found, it didn't necessarily suggest that there was an integration. One of the documents that he found suggested that there was no integration, because one of the Native American groups told Columbus that those black people, we don't know where they came from, but we don't mix with them. They over there on the other side. We don't really deal with them too much unless we fight them. And so yet again, that would be, well, then why would you be looking for DNA evidence if they didn't seek to integrate? So again, like I said, so, you know, in Egypt itself, you have thousands of archaeologists, thousands of researchers, and they're constantly working. They're constantly working. They got three shifts. They got the day shift, the evening shift, and the morning shift. Egyptology itself is heavily funded. Mesoamerican research is not heavily funded like that. Not like that. Egyptology is heavily funded, with universities, museums, and governments all investing in ongoing excavations. They use high-tech tools like LiDAR. Now, don't even get me started. I kind of know what it is, but I kind of don't know what it is. It's similar to radar, but it's different. They're using ground penetrating radar. Again, that's what LiDAR is. Satellite imaging. They're using all of this to uncover hidden structures and artifacts in Egypt. That's why every day, almost every day, they find something. I've been signed up to several ancient Egyptian discovery news channels. Every other day, guess what? We done found something. Never knew this was here, because they're using all this technology. All I'm saying is, if you have a whole lot of people looking for something, it stands to reason you can find something. If you ain't got nobody looking, you ain't gonna find it. In the Americas, there are very few teams that are actively searching for pre-Columbian African connections. Even when you do have the research, even when you do have the funding, there's not a lot of people committed to spending money to find something they don't want to find. They don't want to find evidence of an African presence. So of course there's not a whole lot of money in that. When they do put money into it, that's the last thing they want to deal with. There's limited funding and institutional interest in proving these theories. There's many potential sites remain unexplored completely due to this very historical bias and research priorities. So I would ask you, Babylon Dawn, shout out to you for coming into the show. Laser radar. That's right, my brother. LiDAR is laser radar. So let me ask you this. What if there was this big switch to the focus? What if the same level of funding, what if the same level of manpower, the same level of technology was dedicated to early African contact in the Americas? You know how strong of a chance it would be that they would find a lot more evidence? The evidence that had been found so far was already tucked away, trying to be hidden. It'd be all kind of stuff coming out, just like in Egypt. So, like I said, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. It just might mean the absence of effort to look for it, of effort to find it. Now, again, I'm gonna go on to my next little section, because I think it's also worth commenting on. These brothers and sisters that like to tear down our African giant scholars, I've heard them say things like, y'all on that black stuff. Y'all on that Afrocentric stuff. And I'm like, okay, maybe they were. Now, I ain't saying that that's a bad thing. But I tell you one thing, Ivan Van Sertima used every qualified, valid, verifiable researcher he could find. He didn't just use Black research. Hell, back then there was no significant amount of Black people doing this research. All he had access to were the white people and the Mexican or the Mesoamerican people who were conducting research. So with that in mind, I'm just going to bring up at least the names. Because mainstream archaeology likes to dismiss Van Sertima's argument. But several scholars, including Mexican researchers, have provided evidence suggesting that African contact with the Americas before Columbus is definitively plausible. Definitively plausible. You got Vicente Riva Palacio, a Mexican historian, 19th century. He documented early Spanish accounts describing Black people already present in the Americas before European arrival. He ain't know no Black stuff. He ain't know no Afrocentric stuff. There's even some Spanish chroniclers who reported seeing dark-skinned people with woolly hair. That ain't the typical Mexican. That ain't the typical Mesoamerican. That's the African. But they saw these dark-skinned, woolly-haired people amongst indigenous groups in the Caribbean and South America. So if you got some in the Caribbean, and the evidence suggests they weren't indigenous to that area, you got some in South America, and the evidence suggests they weren't indigenous to that area, where they come from? They came from Africa. These observations align with similar reports by early European explorers like Peter Martyr. Well, I'm going to mess his name up. Peter Martyr de Angeria. I told you I'm going to mess his name up. And Diego Alvarez Chanca. Both wrote about encounters with dark-skinned natives. And in their mind, they were dark enough as to be different. Now, there's a source for this. I ain't making this up. Riva Palacio, or Vicente Riva Palacio. He wrote a book called México a través de los siglos in 1888. I know it's outdated. That's not the point. The point is, these were historians of their time. And in their time, they were writing that we got evidence of an African presence. So you cannot say that Ivan Van Sertima was fabricating. He was not writing fiction. He was reporting to you what other people have been finding. It ain't gonna be in the U.S. textbook. Let me see. Shout out. Let me see. Babylon Dawn outside the box says Robin Walker. That's another excellent historian. Black History Man shows info on Africans in America before colonization. Thank you for that. Anybody, if you're really interested, go get that book. Look it up. Do some research. That's another good one. You also got Santiago Genovese, a Mexican anthropologist. So if you don't like the historians, if you don't like the chroniclers, then you got the archaeologists. You got the anthropologists. Genovese conducted studies on early transoceanic navigation and believed it was entirely possible that African sailors could have reached the Americas via ocean currents. He ain't no Black stuff. He ain't Afrocentric. His work built on, now check this name out, Thor Heyerdahl's Raw expeditions. I'm supposed to know where Thor Heyerdahl came from. I think it was the Netherlands. But this was a guy who said he wanted to see, can he use the materials that would have been present in West Africa at the time that we're talking about to build a boat and put it in the water and have it successfully sail to the Americas? And the answer is yes. So Santiago Genovese built on Heyerdahl's work, which demonstrated that ancient boats made of papyrus reeds could successfully cross the Atlantic. While Genovese didn't claim direct African influence on the Olmecs, he didn't claim direct African influence on the Olmecs. He challenged the assumption that transatlantic voyages were impossible. So again, we have Mesoamerican researchers, scholars, who, whether they're trying to directly or indirectly, support Ivan Van Sertima's theoretical framework. So why we got black people trying to tear him down? Y'all getting paid by somebody? Is that what it is? So you don't believe me? Santiago Genovese's work is called Antropología y el Estudio del Hombre Prehistórico in 1973. Then we come along and we find out Alfonso Medellín Zenil, a Mexican archaeologist who worked on Olmec sites in Veracruz. He openly stated that Olmec artwork and iconography suggest outside influence. And he said it's quite possible that outside influence did come from Africa. He noted that certain statuettes, certain glyphs, certain artifacts bear striking resemblance, striking similarities to West African designs, Now, he did stop short of definitively proving African presence, but he was one of the few Mexican archaeologists willing to seriously explore the possibility. And he said, we got something here. So Alfonso Medellín Zenil, his book is called Los Olmecas y su Origen in 1960. And then you got Paul G. Bond, an archaeologist and a proponent of early African travel. His work supports the idea that early African seafarers could have reached the Americas. He argues that the currents from West Africa, the Canary Current, naturally pushed towards the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, making such a journey more feasible than previously thought. Again, I ask you, how can you, in good conscience, say that Ivan Van Sertima's work is fiction or almost fiction? How can you try to discredit his work when there are so many other official scholars that substantiate his claims? And you just a brother on YouTube. You just a brother on Facebook. Yeah, I'm just a brother on YouTube too. But I'm not dismissing his work out of hand. I'm finding research that substantiates his work. If you want to dismiss him, if you want to discredit him, you don't just say it's hogwash. You got to prove it. And how are you going to prove it when there's so many other findings that substantiate his claim? Enrique Marquez, a Mexican historian and researcher, he's specifically written about the African presence in ancient Mesoamerica, particularly the Olmecs. He argues that Olmec art, customs, and possibly even linguistic elements bear similarities to African cultures. His research highlights that Olmec sculptures and traditions suggest cross-cultural interactions rather than an isolated civilization. Now, isn't that interesting? I was more aligned. Shout out to Zach Manasseh. Shout out to Taro White Melly. Shout out to Ransom Man. or Ransom Man 6 on TikTok. I was more inclined to make the argument that I could see more validity in the Africans that came over, set up camp, and stayed away. But that's me on the outside. I didn't get on a plane and go research. The people that hit the sites, the people that do the digging, they're saying, oh no, we got contact people. So that's Enrique Marquez, who wrote África en América, la influencia de los culturas africanas en el México prehispánico. And then you got Rafike Jarisaboy. Now I know I messed up that name. He argued that Mesoamerican civilizations, especially the Olmecs, he included the Mayans, he included the Incas, show clear signs of African influence in art, in symbolism, in architecture. He supports the idea that the Egyptians and West Africans had maritime capabilities long before Columbus. Now, let me get it straight. When I started this, I said that Ivan Van Sertima's argument about the ancient Egyptians, I said that was weak. Now, I only said it was weak in reference to ancient Egyptians getting to America. I didn't say I necessarily disagreed. I just said I understand how that could be a weak argument. But that's not what Rafike is saying. Rafike is simply saying that the ancient Egyptians had maritime capabilities. Now that's I wouldn't dare argue against that. It's obvious and clear that they had maritime capabilities. They got boats all over the place. They found the solar boat. Boat so huge it fit underneath the pyramid. Let me see what Babylon Dawn outside the box says. A lesser known fact is that the first written language found in Mexico is in the Olmec lands. So that's very interesting. The first written language is found in the Olmec lands. Yeah, because I do believe even Ivan Van Sertima, it may not have been him, so don't quote me on this. But I think it was other historians that said the Olmecs are considered the father culture or the father civilization. So the Aztecs, the Incas, and the Mayas all drew forth from the Olmec civilization. So again, Rafike says he supports the idea that the ancient Egyptians and West Africans both had maritime capabilities long before Columbus. That is not really even, especially for the ancient Egyptians, that's not even up for argument. That's a clear fact. That's been established. That's no longer theory. But he also went on to say, based on his linguistic studies, he said there is a possible connection between African and Mesoamerican languages, which is a topic largely dismissed by mainstream academia. That's one of the last ones they ever want to touch. But again, Ivan Van Sertima was a linguist, and he did touch on that. You want to check that source out, Africans in Pre-Columbia America, Linguistic and Cultural Connections by Rafike Jai Rasboy. I'm going to mess the name up. Now, out of all of this stuff that I have said, some of them I may just be a little bit too animated about it, but this next claim, excuse my dramatic flair, it really burns my bottom. Makes me clutch my pearls. And this one is probably the most often repeated claim from the halls of palm-colored academia throwing jabs. We don't need to erase other cultures to uplift ours. Sound like reverse racism conversations to me. And what I would say to that is, this is a false argument, patently false. flat out, plain, bold print, false. Now, why do I say that? Ivan Van Sertima did not say, was not arguing, was not trying to prove, did not have in his theory anything that would suggest the Mesoamericans didn't have a culture and a civilization of their own. He was not making an attempt to erase Mesoamerican culture. He simply said Africans got here before Columbus. He simply said Africans knew of this area, of this territory, of this part of the earth before Europeans. There's no credible scholar that argues Olmec civilization was 100% African. Now, I know we got some pretendians. I know we got some FBA ADOS mixed up in the head, self-hating Negroes, but those aren't scholars. The claim that Ivan Van Sertima put forth is that African travelers may have contributed to Olmec civilization, but that they definitively got here before Europe. Now, when you go through and look at the other linguists and the archaeologists are the ones that established the idea of contributions. Ivan Van Sertima was really simply reporting it. Shout out to the Deontay L show. He says, new to the channel, brother, and this information is very intriguing. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Everybody that joins in, I gotta love my newcomers. Please make sure that you hit the like button. Please make sure you hit that bell down there so that you will get a notification on the next time I go live or whenever I upload a video or what have you. I'm glad that you think the information is very intriguing. So again, Europeans constantly attribute Egypt to the Mediterranean. They constantly attribute Egypt to Greece. I don't see no mass outrage. I don't see anybody saying, y'all trying to erase the culture of. They only throw this dart out there when Black people find information about other Black people being somewhere outside of a Black territory that they are comfortable with. Why is any African historical influence always framed as you trying to invade, you trying to erase? But when they set up European influence, they say it's cultural diffusion. For a long time, they thought that the Persians were the first Europeans to get into the water. They were the first seafaring people till they found them boats in ancient Egypt. And you know, they really burned their bottom when they found out that ancient Egypt was Black. Look at what Count Volney said. Appreciate that, Deontay. Appreciate that sub. So here's a challenge for you. How is acknowledging potential African influence erasure, but ignoring it completely, denying it completely? How is that not erasure? How is that not erasure? If you want to say, absolutely not, impossible, that in and of itself is erasure. Yeah, mainstream archaeologists mostly reject the African Olmec connection, but scholars, including Mexican historians, anthropologists, and linguists, have provided evidence that suggests transatlantic African contact is at least plausible. And let it be known that almost every time we say mainstream archaeologists, mainstream historians, mainstream scholars, we are talking about either A, white people, or B, non-white people who've only given credence to white scholars, to white people. Babylon Dawn says, big facts. The so-called Mayan calendar with the face in the center is really an Olmec calendar. Big facts. Big facts. No pushback from me on that one. Now, I got a little bit more evidence for you. And I'm only going this far and going this hard because, again, I can't even count the number of times I've been in these conversations where it's brothers and sisters, it's Black people in the conscious community. And I'm like, from the jump, I'm like, I respect this person. I appreciate this person's view. And then they just turn around and start slamming and tearing down. I'm like, wait a minute, how you pro-Black? But you want to disrespect Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Ben? You want to disrespect Cheikh Anta Diop, but you pro-Black? But you African-centered? So there are Spanish colonial records. Some early Spanish reports mention the presence of dark-skinned African-featured people among indigenous populations in Mexico and Central America. So how is Ivan Van Sertima writing a fiction when he's simply telling you, hey, there's a Spanish guy, there's a Mexican historian who said there is Mandinka and Mesoamerican language parallels. Now you get into this linguistic study. Some linguists, such as Leo Weiner, found overlapping words between Mandinka and indigenous Mesoamerican languages. There are artifacts, there are art styles. Some pre-Columbian terracotta figurines resemble African designs. But mainstream archaeology dismisses this as artistic coincidences. They never do this when there's an artistic coincidence where they're at the center of the debate. So we got to get away from this one-sidedness. We got to get away from this all praise the white man, all praise white scholarship. These quote-unquote mainstream archaeologists, they mostly reject everything coming up out of Africa. They reject African Olmec connection. They reject Africa, Egypt being a Black civilization and an African civilization. But the real scholars, the Mesoamerican historians, the Mexican anthropologists, the Mexican linguists, they've all provided evidence that suggests transatlantic African contact is at least plausible. That's the same thing Ivan Van Sertima said. So if all these people, I named a good 6 or 7 of them, so they all writing fiction too? Again, I keep going back to this. The European contact theories, people jumping up and down about the Vikings in America. And they celebrate it. So you tell me why they want to, why do they want to castigate Ivan Van Sertima, but they don't want to talk about any of his research? They don't want to talk about the Mexican American, the Mesoamerican. They don't want to talk about any of the scholars that substantiate his work. They just want to write his book off and say, oh, it's hogwash. It's gibberish. It's fiction. That's a slander campaign. That's a slander campaign. This selective acceptance of history is a Eurocentric bias. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be kicked on off of the field of discussion. Overall, after all, Van Sertima's theories, which is what they were, they may not be absolutely 100% airtight, but neither is the challenge. They like to bring up an incomplete DNA study. Hey, we only looked at one side of it. The challenge that we have, we need to be questioning Eurocentric historical narratives. Shout out to only one Lisa Love who joined on Instagram. I'm forgetting my social media, ladies and gentlemen. But Ivan Van Sertima's research, Ivan Van Sertima's work, Ivan Van Sertima's textbooks, because that's really what they are. They teach us how to think critically about data. They teach us how to draw our own conclusions. They teach us how to defend our own conclusions. And that's supremely important in a world where they will simply tell you, you ain't never contributed nothing to nothing. Let me say, so, because let's face it, history has already been whitewashed more times than Huckleberry Finn. So my last little challenge to the critics, I think this is my last one. If mainstream historians revise other timelines, if mainstream scientists revise their work, Einstein did it, Fomenko did it, archaeologists do it all the time. Every time they find something new in ancient Egypt, they go back and be like, oh, wait a minute. They revised the timeline in ancient Egypt to make sure that they are accounting for all of the pharaohs. And then they find a new pharaoh. Oops, we got to revise it again. So why is Van Sertima's work dismissed outright instead of being refined, instead of being appreciated? You know, they did the same thing to check out Diop. And especially these Black people who got online, and I guess because it was their first time they had access to a database, they found all of these white scholars that were writing against Check onto Diop. And then they started making YouTube videos and Facebook posts saying, see, look what they said about him. They were the same people that he defeated at UNESCO. Not all historical narratives are always dismissed equally. Some revisions are embraced. I wonder which ones. If they align with Eurocentric perspectives, they are embraced, they are praised. We need to do further research on this. When it's a Black scholar who challenges the status quo, the burden of proof suddenly becomes impossibly high. That's the real issue. Let me see. Now, as I normally do in my show, I opened up with an African proverb. Let me hit you with another one because it's been a minute. Wisdom is like a baobab tree. Now, I always say this word wrong. Baobab tree, baobab tree. Suffer with me. No one individual can embrace it. This Akan proverb suggests that understanding history requires collective insight, perhaps integrating diverse scholarly perspectives can lead us closer to the truth instead of only dealing with what the white man says is real. So let that sink in for you. Remember, history is a mosaic of countless stories, some told, many untold. History is a mosaic of countless stories, some told, many untold, especially when they come to us. It's up to us to piece them together with curiosity, skepticism, and an open mind. It's up to us to further the research of these great scholars who put in all this work in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It is not time for us to tear these people down. It is not time for us to chuck their research. VanSertima may have had some flaws in his work, but that doesn't make the core argument fiction. Dismissing Black history in this way, yes, even Ivan Van Sertima's theories as wishful thinking without applying the same skepticism to whitewashed history is anti-intellectual or sycophantic. There is enough linguistic, cultural, and circumstantial evidence to support further investigation, which is what Ivan Van Sertima's goal was, to spur further investigation. But shutting it down entirely, That's Eurocentric gatekeeping. Obafemi is doing exactly what I knew it was going to happen before I got up out of here. Obafemi is doing exactly what Eurocentric historians want, dismissing our history instead of refining it. Now, with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's my proper perspective. We need to read Ivan Van Sertima. We need to support Ivan Van Sertima. We do not need to be dismissing Ivan Van Sertima. And with that, I'm probably gonna begin the countdown, ladies and gentlemen, to the closeout. I thank you all for showing up. I thank you for paying attention on TikTok. I thank you for paying attention on Instagram. I thank you for paying attention on Facebook. I thank you for paying attention and joining the chat and leaving comments on YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe. Feel free to share this video, this stream, this channel with any of your friends, any of your associates. Hell, you can send it to some enemies if you want. I just want the likes. Hit the like button. I just want exposure. Yeah, I do. I really do. I want to continue this conversation. But if you hit that bell, then you'll get the notification so that the next time I go live, you'll get the notice so you can join in as well. Now, what I'm going to do to close out, I'm going to get ready to share my screen. Unless anybody wanted to say something else. If not, that's cool. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to holler back at y'all next time. So here we go. Put that on the top.
Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective. Shabazz, break it down with the proper perspective.